Hello, my friends, and welcome back to 15-Minute Free Thinking. This is Friday's podcast for June something, 2022. And today I'm going to talk about psychedelics, psychedelic drugs, if you will. I consider many drugs to be medicines, and of course, many medicines to be drugs. It's very hard to distinguish the difference. It comes down to semantics. If you go back 40, 50 years, they would be considered the bane of humanity. Nixon's war on drugs caused so much hysteria and fear around these substances that people completely lost touch with the fact that psychedelic drugs can be some of the most useful and beneficial, and in my opinion, the most beneficial drugs on the planet, because of the very simple fact that they have a strong positive effect on the mind, or they can, and the mind and the body are one. And I'm going to try not to get into any woo-woo here, or conjecture, or speculation about these drugs. I'm just going to discuss my beliefs about their benefits, and why I don't discuss it more often is very simple, because YouTube had taken upon themselves to delete many of my videos and send me warnings regarding certain content as being, quote, dangerous in the past, and therefore, even though psychedelics have had a huge impact on my life, personally, I feel like I'm unable to even discuss it on the platform. But I'm making a podcast and a companion video version. So my disclaimer is, if you're going to use these substances, do it for your own reasons on your own accord. Do not repeat anything as that I say as being gospel, obviously. Don't think that I am suggesting anything here. Or should I just give the old FDA warning? Nothing here in this video is intended to diagnose, prevent, or cure any illness. So now that we have that out of the way, this is just my opinion on these amazing substances. And it stems from several discussions I've had with people recently about them. But then today I was talking with somebody I know about microdosing, and I was saying that it might be better to do a deep trip, and because then we can get to the roots of our anxieties. And they said that, they know where their anxiety comes from, and it got me thinking about some of the deep experiences I've had and how revealing they were to myself about things I wasn't even aware of, that I was unable to not just articulate. Plenty common that we can't vocalize exactly what we want to say. But when it comes down to thought, it can be even more complex. Our brains are a jumble of neurons and connections, and they're always racing. We're always thinking about something, whether we're walking, or talking, or singing, or dancing, or just sitting and watching YouTube. There are a million things out there that our brains are constantly processing. And so psychedelics break that. They break that noise. And I had this I wanted to think of a metaphor that I could think of for taking a deep trip on psychedelics versus taking, say, a medication for anxiety, for psychosis, for any number of antipsychotics, anxiolytics, antidepressants, as well as street drugs, heroin, cocaine, amphetamines. Now you take all of these things, and what do they have in common? They all change the mind. They all alter the mind, but they do them in different ways. Now when you take something to mask the pain, for example, somebody takes a prescription painkiller. This only hides the pain. The pain is rooted in something deeper, something that could be physical or it could be mental, causing physical pain. That's possible as well. But usually it's a physical anomaly that needs to be dealt with, so hiding the pain doesn't make it go away. And as soon as you stop taking that painkiller, the pain comes back. I feel very similar about, for example, microdosing, which is taking very small amounts of the psychedelics. People claim to have a reprieve and a feeling of, it helps them in some way. There's no way to analyze how much or whether it's placebo in some people. It doesn't matter. If it seems to work, it seems to work. But the discussion got me thinking about why the deep trip is so much more important. Because what happens when you take a larger dose of a psychedelic is it shuts down your frontal cortex to the point where you stop processing the external world the same way, and this brings on hallucinations and many different aspects of the drugs, which we're learning a lot more about as time goes on. But it also puts you into a temporary sense of confusion, which I call the comatose state or my chrysalis, and then I come out as a butterfly. After a couple hours of just going through some mental shit, then I wake up into this new reality where I'm able to think differently. I'm able to process things differently and make connections that ordinarily I would be shutting myself out from because I'm too busy surviving in the world. It makes you very open. So the beauty of this experience is that it's so long lasting. It allows you to process things so thoroughly that weeks or even months down the line, you have a long-lasting benefit from this one trip. Now that's the amazing part. But that means to me, of course, taking a psychedelic once or twice a year can usually stave off some of the, the heebies that creep in and the depression and the anxiety and the feelings about the future and all the different shit that builds up in our lives. But it has to be done properly. Now, as they become more accepted, as they become decriminalized, and many people are setting up various mushrooms, shops, but also counselors doing trip sitting where you go in and the doctor oversees your experience, that might be a good thing for a first timer. But once you get more advanced, and you know what to expect, I believe that there's much more benefit going out to the woods or going out with someone and staying in a cabin somewhere or enjoying a nice quiet evening in a hot tub, whatever it might be, but really getting the full experience in a comfortable environment that you enjoy. This is called set and setting. That is what's like the first lesson that people learn when they take psychedelics, or they should learn. And fortunately, when I was young and I tried them, I'd known about this, and I read about, it means the set is where are you at, and like what kind of mindset, rather, mentally are you in. And the setting is the place, the actual physical environment where you're experiencing this, which I always say, trip with somebody else. It's not just a fun thing, but it can be a fun thing. And it is because of the fact that you are able to let go of so much of the baggage during that experience. But it's demanding. It's very demanding on the brain if you do it right, because you think about things you don't want to think about. And so, as I said earlier about the metaphor, I was thinking, so life is a stream, and we're always floating down this stream, but really there's not a lot to grab onto. And I always use the stream and the same as the stream of consciousness, right? So you're floating down this stream of consciousness. Sometimes you might take a drug and it might allow you to maybe hang onto a rock for a little while or something, or a branch, but eventually you're swept back down the stream. Psychedelics can allow you to float up on the shore of a small island, go up and pitch a tent and a campfire, dry off, and then look down the stream from a high vantage point and see what's coming. That's the best I could think of, because I feel like it gives you time to process things that ordinarily we just don't process or don't want to. And it's amazing the things that we shut out from ourselves. So the island, is the psychedelic trip. But eventually you have to get back in that stream. And this is where the addiction factor comes in when people say psychedelics are not addictive. They're not in the traditional physical sense. But I have met people who take them too often or all the time because they have found that it's so rewarding to go into that place and process these things that they think they can constantly do that. And you can't. You just can't. You need to respect the substance and only do moderate doses at moderate times. Taking a lot more is not always a lot better. People taking half ounce or an ounce of mushrooms is ridiculous. The most I've ever taken was 7 grams of dried cubensis. I believe they were golden teachers. With a friend in the woods, and we laid and watched the stars at Mount Adams, and it was intense. It was amazing. I mean, I was up all night. Usually I'll fall asleep at some point, but no, that was something different and a very wild experience. But I've also had, 5 or 6 grams at a time at different times, and that's a huge dose of good mushrooms. And they really set me straight. But my first few years, my experiences were all with LSD because that's what was going around in the early 90s. So I was, not introduced to mushrooms until a few years later. And those LSD trips, the first few ones I had, I believe that they really changed a lot of, perhaps shifted my direction in life to a strong degree, because the things that I saw and the things I realized, times being reborn and just having these experiences where I was in tears with ecstasy and happiness at just being alive and existing, it probably kept me from suffering from depression, because I was going through my father's death at 15, and I had a lot of things to be sad about, but I wasn't. I made the most of my youth. I think that some of these experiences helped me to process and handle that issue with mortality. And to this day, so many of the things that I've read and learned and experienced have, of course, shaped who I am. And we take it for granted because it's just who we are. We don't know how other people think. We don't understand what other people are going through and how much they need to process. I want to say straight out, psychedelics are not for everyone. Because, like I said, when I first started taking them, they benefited me immensely. But there were other people within our friend group who did not benefit immensely. One of my friends had to go to the hospital and sit in a white room until he came down, which freaked me out all night because I thought he was going to, I was going to get in trouble because we'd taken it together. There's a lot of funny stories I would love to share about my experiences on psychedelics, but that's not what this is about. This is just about the effects and the benefits in my thoughts on this. And like I said, the main difference to remember is the difference between it and other substances, psychedelics and other drugs, is that the effects are based on your thoughts, right? Not on your feelings. And that's often so many drugs are based on either blocking your feelings altogether or just changing how you feel about something. Benzodiazepines are an amazing drug. Very similar effect to the effects of alcohol, which when you're first drinking alcohol, you don't really understand it. It just makes you dizzy. After you've drank for a while, the effects are different. The same with cannabis, right? And that's usually where I'm at, is cannabis. I'm not a big consumer of other drugs, and I don't take psychedelics very often. I just stick to my basic green herb, right? Well, alcohol, on the other hand, and cannabis, you'll feel differently every time you take it. The same thing happens with psychedelics. The more you ease into psychedelics, the better off you are. Take them sparingly, because you will lose that first glow. Especially, haven't brought up MDMA yet, because it's not really considered a psychedelic in the traditional sense, but it is an extremely useful tool as well. And very good for people who don't want to maybe go too deep into their minds, but still want to process. And especially good for, say, couples or groups of friends that just want to hang out together and have a good talkative evening. But really, the psychedelic trip itself, I think, is completely different in the sense that you're processing things in a way that reflects on who you are. So the hallucinations you see or the mindset that you're in, it can have to do with where you are physically as far as your setting, but it can also be where you are in your set. You could be in the nicest, coziest room and still be freaking out. I've made the mistake of forgetting how pliable we are in that state, and I put on Pink Floyd, some old, dark, early Pink Floyd, and realized the person that I was with was freaking out. And, music can be very scary in that state. That very susceptible state that we're in, that's where the benefit comes in. When we've kind of lost our ability to really process the world normally, but our voices, the thing is, if you talk to somebody on psychedelics, they might be out of their mind, hallucinating, but often their voice is totally coherent, functional. You can speak normally. You don't slur your speech or anything like that. That's because the mental faculties are still working. They're just working in a different way. And often closing your eyes for a few minutes, the things that we see can reveal a little bit about who we are and what kind of thoughts we have and ideas we have. You can go on some wild journeys, It's almost like hypnagogia is like when you're just falling asleep and you have hallucinations as you're falling asleep. It's the opposite of that is hypnopompic. That's the hallucinations you have as you're waking up, which can also kind of meld into sleep paralysis and many different effects where you have hallucinations. And I've always been fascinated by the world of hallucinations. And I've read a book by Oliver Sacks called Hallucinations, actually, and I'm reading another one from him called Musicophilia, and it's about people and the way they process music and how some people can't hear certain chords or notes and music just sounds horrible to them, but also how people hallucinate music and how geniuses, might be able to come up with these amazing, piano compositions, but before they're five. Everybody processes things differently. Therefore, psychedelics are going to be processed completely differently by each person. So I urge awareness and caution, but they are becoming more publicly, I guess, acceptable, and that's a good thing in my opinion. So I have 3 books here that I wanted to share, and these are Pharmacognosis, Pharmacopoeia, and Pharmacodynamics. And all 3 of these books, I think 2 of them my friend Tim gave me, thank you Tim, back in like 2009, and so I bought the 3rd one, but it's written by Dale Pendell, and the first one is, the subtitle is Stimulating Plants, Potions, and Herbcraft. The next one is Plant Teachers and the Poison Path, and the last one is Power Plants, Poisons, and Herbcraft. And these talk about a lot of different psychedelics, and this is kind of advanced for a lot of people that are just getting introduced, so it's not like this is an introduction to psychedelics, but it's written very poetically in a way that a person who understands psychedelics would be able to relate to. And the reason I bring these up is because each book has a specific discussions about each drug, but it talks about the ally, as in what is the friend in the plant. What spirit does this plant have? And that sounds silly to people, especially if you're, say, full-blown atheist, you just believe in, everything is, or a materialist, I guess you would say, where there is no other realm or anything like that. And I'm not going to go too deep into that, but let's just say once you've tried a few different psychedelics, you realize they have personalities. And these personalities can be masculine or feminine, quite often feminine, and I honestly don't know if that's, I'm not going to get into that, but it's fascinating, the feeling that you can get, the messages you can get from these male and female energies that just everyone seems to process through different cultures the same way. It's like as it triggers a certain part of your brain, in all people, they're very similar, so why does this happen? I don't know. Is it all in our heads? Who knows? But at any rate, these plants, these substances, I should say, I know a lot of people realize LSD is a synthetic drug, but it's not necessarily. It's derived from the ergot fungus, which grows on wheat and contaminated a lot of wheat crops through history and caused a lot of people to have some crazy hallucinations after eating that said wheat. But refined in the lysergic acid diethylamide form, it is quite a potent hallucinogen indeed, and it's a little too long lasting for some people and recommended for people who have teachers, gurus with them to trip with them. I'd love to do that someday to help people when that becomes legal and viable to trip with people, because I love introducing people to that new experience, but it's a burden too, because some people don't handle it very well, and that can be tough. And but I think most people overall, with the right dose, find that it can benefit them. Now, on a final note, mostly I'm talking about LSD, psilocybin, even MDMA, but I haven't mentioned the one that a lot of people will ask about. What about DMT? DMT, dimethyltryptamide. This is one of the most intense hallucinogens known to mankind in its derived form. Wow, it blows you away. It sends you to the moon, and that's, as I believe it was Terrence McKenna who said it's like being shot to the moon in a cannon. It's a wild ride, crazy experience, and it will leave you believing that there are other entities and other beings out there that are entwined within our own reality. I can't explain it in any human shape or form. It's like the wildest dream you've ever had, and but it's beyond anything you could ever explain. It's like going through these like tunnels of creatures working and these gnomes. I mean, people have heard all the stories, but big question is, what are you getting from it? And when people take ayahuasca, that's one I have not done yet, which is a DMT mixed with an MAOI, which is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor that stops it from breaking down, your gut from breaking down the DMT and allows it to be absorbed orally. That's why people usually smoke it. And that can be very intense too, and I'd like to try that and do a trip report one day. But I've kind of held off on that. I don't know why. Just haven't run across it, I guess, and never really saw the need to feel like I needed to take something and then puke for a while. I have done mescaline, and that was probably the purest and most amazing experience of my life. But it was also at a Fish concert where the Beastie Boys played right before them, and I, it was fun. A long time ago, a friend of mine made some and gave me some capsules, and I took them with me to Bonnaroo, and yeah, I had a great experience, but it's very hard to get, so I won't get into too much detail. Well, knowing that you can't find any anywhere, but anyway, to finalize this, they're all very similar. 6 to 10 hour trips, and there are many other compounds I'm not getting into here, analogs. There are many different forms of DMT, many different forms of LSD. There's LSA, there's ALLAD, it just goes on. 2CB, I've had that, it's great. A little shorter lived, but harder to get usually, and more expensive as well. So LSD and I think mushrooms are the most affordable and most common that most people will come across. And as for DMT, to finalize that discussion, it's not long enough lasting to benefit me long term. And that's what I was going to say. It's more like hanging on to that stick or rock in the stream for a minute and going, whoa, this is crazy. And then you're back to normal going, what was that? But you didn't have the time to process anything internally. And I'm sure taking it orally in the form of ayahuasca is different. So that is a story to be told in the future. So, be safe and be smart. And I think that the long trip is much better than the microdose just because of the longer lasting epiphanies and realities. And people have taken psychedelics for PTSD, for anxiety, depression, and fear and terminal illness, all kinds of things. But I'll tell you, it's really important that we realize that some people, it can make things worse if they're not careful. I've personally seen somebody go into psychedelic-induced psychosis, a couple people actually, that lasted a period of up to a few months. And eventually it, subsides. But there is something that comes out of this, the, Prophet on the Burning Shore. It's a song by the Grateful Dead. It's called Estimated Profit, and apparently it was about guys who go to concerts, take too many drugs, and think that they're what they call the Christ complex, or the Messiah complex, where people have taken drugs and then they think that they're meant to do some service, that they're the second coming of God, or they're the new prophet, and they get people to follow them because people are desperate. And this is where you hear about these cults where people have taken psychedelics and think that they're gods. That it's just, if you don't have anybody to check you and put you in your place, you can think and start seeing connections and patterns that really don't exist. It's called apophenia. There's pareidolia and apophenia. One is seeing faces in everything, and the other one's seeing patterns that don't exist and making connections that don't exist. And we all know this in the conspiracy realm. It's pretty wild out there, the things that people make assumptions about. Because if you look hard enough, you can always find a way to justify what you believe. So don't let psychedelics turn you into a false guru either. And I think that's about all I wanted to discuss. Yeah, I appreciate you all coming along, and Hope you learned something, and if not, I'm sorry. And if so, right on. If you want to support me on Patreon, I have a link to more psychedelic videos on my Patreon page. Only $1 a month. And for all my patrons, thank you. And for everyone else, the podcast is free. It's available on all platforms. If you prefer to download it in the audio version. And if you want to watch the video, it'll be on YouTube. So thanks for listening. This will be episode 73 of my podcast, I think. And so thanks to all of you who listen to the podcast. I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you next time. And if you want to hear more about psychedelic content, let me know. And I'll talk to you soon. Peace out.